The Sinking of the Titanic and Other Great Sea Disasters, edited by Logan Marshall. Last Moments. That great ship, which started out as proudly, went down to her death like some grimed, silent juggernaut, drunk with carnage and anxious to stop the throbbing of her own heart at the bottom of the sea. Charles H. Lightoller, second officer of the Titanic, tells the story this way. I stuck to the ship until the water came up to my ankles. There had been no lamentations, no demonstrations either from the men passengers as they saw the last lifeboat go, and there was no wailing or crying, no outburst from the men who lined the ship's rail as the Titanic disappeared from sight. The men stood quietly as if they were in church. They knew that they were in the sight of God, that in a moment judgment would be passed upon them. Finally, the ship took a dive, reeling for a moment, then plunging. I was sucked to the side of the ship, against the grating over the blower for the exhaust. There was an explosion. It blew me to the surface again, only to be sucked back again by the water rushing into the ship. This time I landed against the grating over the pipes, which furnish a draught for the funnels, and stuck there. Then there was another explosion, and I came to the surface. The ship seemed to be heaving tremendous sighs as she went down. I found myself not many feet from the ship, but on the other side of it. The ship had turned around while I was under the water. I came up near a collapsible lifeboat and grabbed it. Many men were in the water with me. They had jumped at the last minute. A funnel fell within 4 inches of me and killed one of the swimmers. 30 clung to the capsized boat, and a lifeboat, with 40 survivors in it already, finally took them off. George D. Widener and Harry Elkins Widener were among those who jumped at the last minute. So did Robert Williams Daniel. The 3 of them went down together. Daniel struck out, lashing the water with his arms until he had made a point far distant from the sinking monster of the sea. Later, he was picked up by one of the passing lifeboats. The Wideners were not seen again, nor was John B. Thayer, who went down on the boat. Jack Thayer, who was literally thrown off the Titanic by an explosion after he had refused to leave the men to go with his mother, floated around on a raft for an hour before he was picked up. Afloat with Jack Thayer. Graphic accounts of the final plunge of the Titanic were related by 2 Englishmen, survivors by the merest chance. One of them struggled for hours to hold himself afloat on an overturned collapsible lifeboat, to one end of which John B. Thayer, Jr., of Philadelphia, whose father perished, hung until rescued. The men gave their names as A. H. Barkworth, Justice of the Peace of East Riding, Yorkshire, England, and W. J. Mellors, of Christ Church Terrace, Chelsea, London. The latter, a young man, had started for this country with his savings to seek his fortune, and had lost all but his life. Mellors, like Quartermaster Moody, said Captain Smith did not commit suicide. Afloat with Jack Thayer. Graphic accounts of the final plunge of the Titanic were related by 2 Englishmen, survivors by the merest chance. One of them struggled for hours to hold himself afloat on an overturned collapsible lifeboat, to one end of which John B. Thayer, Jr., of Philadelphia, whose father perished, hung until rescued. The men gave their names as A. H. Barkworth, Justice of the Peace of East Riding, Yorkshire, England, and W. J. Mellors, of Christ Church Terrace, Chelsea, London. The latter, a young man, had started for this country with his savings to seek his fortune, and had lost all but his life. Mellors, like Quartermaster Moody, said Captain Smith did not commit suicide. The captain jumped from the bridge, Mellors declares, and he heard him say to his officers and crew, "You have done your duty, boys, now every man for himself." Mellors and Barkworth, who say their names have been spelled incorrectly in most of the lists of survivors, both declare that there were 3 distinct explosions before the Titanic broke in 2, and bow section first, and stern part last, settled with her human cargo into the sea. Her 4 whistles kept up a deafening blast until the explosions, declare the men. The death cries from the shrill throats of the blatant steam screechers beside the smokestacks so rent the air that conversation among the passengers was possible only when one yelled into the ear of a fellow unfortunate. "I did not know the Thayer family well," declared Mr. Barkworth, "but I had met young Thayer, a clear-cut chap, and his father on the trip. The lad and I struggled in the water for several hours, endeavoring to hold afloat by grabbing to the sides and end of an overturned lifeboat. Now and again we lost our grip and fell back into the water. I did not recognize young Thayer in the darkness, as we struggled for our lives, but I did recall having met him before when we were picked up by a lifeboat. We were saved by the merest chance, because the survivors on a lifeboat that rescued us hesitated in doing so, it seemed, fearing perhaps that additional burdens would swamp the frail craft. I considered my fur overcoat helped to keep me afloat. I had a life preserver over it, under my arms, but it would not have held me up so well out of the water but for the coat. The fur of the coat seemed not to get wet through, and retained a certain amount of air that added to buoyance. I shall never part with it." The testimony of J. Bruce Ismay, managing director of the White Star Line, that he had not heard explosions before the Titanic settled, indicates that he must have gotten some distance from her in his lifeboat. There were 3 distinct explosions, and the ship broke in the center. The bow settled headlong first, and the stern last. I was looking toward her from the raft to which young Thayer and I had clung.